Hi, welcome back. My name is Brittany. Today's video is all about audiobooks because June is Audiobook Appreciation Month, and do I appreciate my audiobooks. Some of my favorite stories over the last few years have been audiobooks, and so we're just gonna gush and talk about them today. Some things that I think can affect your overall enjoyability of an audiobook is the narrator. Having a good narrator, for me personally, can really make or break the story. How's their voice? How's their delivery? Do they have an accent or not? Because sometimes that can be easier or harder to listen to for me. Are they performing? Are they putting emotion in? All of those things can really elevate the experience when done well. I've also found over the years that adjusting the audiobook speed can also make a difference. A lot of times audiobooks are intentionally recorded slower, and they kind of sound like this at the base speed. And that is too slow for me. I'm like hyped up all the time. I probably have some ADHD, and I'm like, I need you to talk faster. Let's go. For me, I can listen anywhere from 1.5 to 2.25 speed. And honestly, it just changes based on what I'm listening to. But I typically do find myself increasing audiobook speed. It sounds more natural to me. I'm able to pay attention because when it's too slow, I'm bored. I'm not listening. I'm like, okay, you're talking too slow. Let's go. So I do recommend, if you are kind of struggling with audiobooks, maybe play around with the speed, because it could just be a speed problem. If you're not sure what to grab, just grab something you're interested in. And sometimes it just takes time to find the right voices for you, the right narrator for you, and the right story. When it all comes together, it's just so lovely and delicious when you just find the best audiobook. Today, I want to talk about two of my favorite narrators. There are two that I tend to gravitate to pretty often. And then in general, I just have some audiobook recommendations for you. Some of my favorite books that are specifically audiobooks that I consumed, and I just want to share and tell you why I liked it. Sometimes are specific reasons why I'm recommending an audiobook, and I will be sure to tell you why I enjoyed it and why I think you should listen. My favorite audiobook narrator is Julia Whelan. Oh my gosh, she narrates so many of my favorite books, and honestly at this point, if she narrates it and I have the choice between her as a narrator or a physical book, I'm going to listen to Julia Whelan narrate the audiobook version instead, hands down, every single time. This woman has not let me down, and I just love what she does with her audiobook narrations. Her voice overall is very nice. She has a really great delivery, the way she says her words, the emotions that she puts into it. You can tell she knows the story, because if they're describing a character's voice, maybe later on in the book, she's already doing it. She knows the book, so she knows how things are going to happen and knows what things sound like. I watched, I think it was an interview with Susie Jackson, who I will talk about in a little bit. And she's like, you can't start off, giving one character one voice, and then a few chapters later, you realize they sound differently. You have to know what your story's about. And you can just tell Julia Whelan really, really takes that into account and does fantastic voice acting. If there's scoffing or laughing, or if they're crying or screaming, she will do those things, and it just elevates the story so much more. I have read a lot of books that she has narrated over the years. I will put up all of my books on the screen for you to see, because there's a handful. So if you want to save this list for later, feel free to screenshot this now if you want some more books that are narrated by Julia Whelan. As always, I will have timestamps and lists and everything in the description below. Starting off in Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. So this is the sweetest, cutest, it's not spicy, but just sweet, lovely, young adult fantasy romance. So this follows Isabel, and she's a painter. She is commissioned to do a painting of Rook, who is the Autumn Fae Prince. And in this painting, she paints human sorrow and emotion on his face. And this is not okay. This is bad for the world. So she is essentially whisked off to fairy court. On the way, her and Rook develop a scheme to try to save Face, get him out of this. How could we make this situation better? Because in this world, the Fae can enjoy human creations, but they can't create themselves. They can't experience humanity. It's an interesting take on fairies. I know they've been written about a lot, but I just really love the narration. Just the overall story is so cozy, so sweet. And I do think it would be a great fall listen if you're looking for a cute fantasy romance later this year. The next book is Educated by Tara Westover, and this is a memoir. Her and her family grew up in Idaho, and her family, her parents, they're survivalists. They did not go to public school. They don't see physicians. They take care of everything at home on their property, which is fine to an extent. When you get into this memoir and you see everything that Tara has gone through, the family life, the abuse, all of these things, it's pretty wacky, and it's pretty amazing that she honestly made it out alive. And like became a writer and became so successful. She grew up never going to public school and decided at 17 to get her GED. She is self-taught, she does this all on her own, and ends up going to Brigham Young University. We get this journey, this coming of age story, and really like just a beautiful look at education and what it means to learn and have access to education. I work in healthcare, and a common frustration is like, why don't people know this? Like, it's common sense. But when you like step back, and especially like when talking about this book, it makes you realize that everyone has different experiences. Like, I think we know that deep down, but just to like see it in a different way, because Tara's really likable. Like, you root for her, you see what's happened to her life. And I mean, I'm reading this or listening and I'm horrified. I'm like, wow, like, oh my God, like this is so bad. But she doesn't know any better. Like, that is all she knows. And so when she comes essentially like to the real world and, you know, goes to college and is in this new strange land for her, like a lot of things aren't common sense for her. They're not common knowledge. And so you really get to see this journey. And I feel like I don't know, I came out listening to this book and really appreciated my education that I honestly had taken for granted and never thought about in that way. It's a powerful story, and I feel like it's just an extra powerful narration by Julia. This next one is really fun. So this is actually written and narrated by Julia Whelan. How special to like be an audiobook narrator by day, but then be able to narrate your own book. I actually think that's so cool. I do not believe this is her debut novel. I think she has a couple other books that she's written. I have not gotten to those yet, but this is called Thank You for Listening. And this is also just fun because the main character, Swanee, is an audiobook narrator. She was an actress and then had since retired after an accident and then became a well-known audiobook narrator, but she was doing this under an alias. She kind of had like taken a step back. She has a whirlwind, like sexy hookup in Vegas. And then on her way home, she realizes that she's been asked to do a narrator gig with Brock McKnight, who is another like famous, well-known audiobook narrator in the romance space. Through like communicating online, they end up working together on this project, but they don't know who they are in real life. They're still communicating with their like, you know, secret identity, other identities, right? Things happen and the identities are revealed, life comes crashing down, and basically we're, you know, experiencing what happens after that. It was a fun listen, and it was just cool to like listen to something she wrote. And I really enjoyed that experience. The next audiobook is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. So this is part of a romance series, and all 3 books are out now. They're following different couples, but I've heard like while they're standalones, you should read it in order. I read this book a while ago. It is a dual narration with Julia being the primary female narrator. And I honestly didn't love the book when I read it. And I do wonder if I would have enjoyed it more had I listened. This book follows Alexis, and she is an ER physician, and she ends up meeting Daniel, and he is like not in her social circle at all. Her parents are like wealthy, like well-known people, and so he really shakes this up when they start to develop a romance. I think what I found frustrating with this book is like how insecure the main character is. I think she's in her 40s, like she's an ER doctor. I'm like, you're a bad bitch. Like, why are you letting your parents boss you around? I found that super frustrating, but I just wonder if maybe listening would have been a different experience. Overall, I remember it being a fun time. So if you are looking for an audiobook, that could be an option because it's narrated by Julia, and we've already established I like her, so you could also check that out too. The next book is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, and this starts off in 1714 France. Addie is engaged to be married, like it's her wedding night, and she like runs away and accidentally makes a deal with the wrong god. She is now granted immortality and her freedom, but no one remembers who she is. So we get to follow her kind of like through the years as she just like wanders and tries to survive and deals with not being remembered. People will meet her one day, and then like 10 minutes later, if they like, as soon as they lose her face, she's gone. Like they do not remember her or what happened or anything. She can't leave her mark on this world in any way. Like if she writes something, if she draws, it just disappears. And every so often she's visited by the god who started this deal, like throughout this whole thing. Like he wants her soul, and she keeps resisting him and like struggles with this life, but is like, I'm not like You pulled a fast one on me, buddy. I'm not doing this. Until one day, she meets a guy who saw her and remembers her the next day. And it is such a fun story. I've read a few other things by V.E. Schwab. I just really like this one so much. It ends up being a really beautiful love story. Julia Whelan does a French accent in here, and I feel like that, like, from what I can remember, it was done really well. I gave this 5 stars a couple years ago, and I just really liked it. So if you're looking for a like time travel almost, like fantasy story, I think this would be worth a listen. Next up is Yerba Buena by Nina LaCour. Gosh, I also listened to this quite some time ago, so I do apologize if my descriptions aren't the best, but this is like a really great female romance. I don't recall if it was spicy at all. I do remember being sweet and lovely, and more so just like stories of who they are independently and how they eventually come together. You do get I think you get both of their perspectives. And if I recall, it was easy to follow who was speaking, even though we have one narrator. Julia was able to portray 2 different people very well. I'm pretty sure one was like a florist and the other is like a well-known mixologist. And like all I can truly remember from this book is thinking like, wow, I just want to like sip cocktails in a floral shop with my girlfriend. Like it was just a vibe, and I really liked it. There are a few authors that write books that Julia Whelan typically narrates, and I just love the combination of the two. So any Emily Henry, Taylor Jenkins Reid, or Kristin Hannah book that is out, I will look and see if Julia's narrated it, because I will always listen to it instead of reading it. I have listened to all of Emily Henry's books: Beach Read, Funny Story, Happy Place, Book Lovers, and People We Meet on Vacation, and I think they are all really fun, really enjoyable. And I mean, honestly, if you just need to kind of like stock up your audiobook library, I would just do it. They're all super fun, and the narration by Julia is great. Taylor Jenkins Reid has a couple: One True Loves, After I Do, Malibu Rising, and Maybe in Another Life. And then The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is narrated by Julia, but there's 2 other narrators, I believe. So she's not the primary one, but she is in this book as well. One True Loves is actually a movie now, but it follows this woman. She's engaged, I think she gets married, and then her husband goes on a trip and is missing. His like plane or helicopter crashes. He's never found. He's pronounced dead. And so she does move on with her life and rekindles love with an old flame. They're also now engaged to be married, and her first husband is found. He comes back. And so it's kind of like, how can you have more than one true love? Like, what happens now, like when you're in love and ready to like start this new life, and like the other guy shows up? Like, what do you do? So that was a really fun listen. After I Do was also really enjoyable. This really just looks at a young married couple, and it opens up with a great fight scene. Whether you're married or not, I think you can understand just like simmering rage and like resentment that can happen when you've been with someone for a while, and just like how bad it can get. And it's like your typical like married couple fight, and it's just really well done as far as like a narration goes. But it really looks at this couple, and they decide to take a year off. It's kind of like free game for a year, discover yourself, do whatever you want, and let's come back and see if this can be saved. And as someone who got married in their early 20s, I've been with my husband for like, I mean, we've known each other since high school. We were high school sweethearts. So like really, I've known this guy for like 20 years. And I just really appreciated the look at like young love and marriages and like just like choosing to be with that person. I really enjoyed that story. Malibu Rising was not my favorite. I don't know. I thought the narration was fine. I just didn't like characters, the setting. I didn't like it compared to Taylor Jenkins Reid's other works. It is cool though if you check out Malibu Rising. I think Daisy Jones and the Six, Evelyn Hugo, there are some crossovers. Oh, and even Carrie Soto, I think, is mentioned in Malibu Rising. So there's some crossovers in this universe. That one was fine for me. And then Maybe in Another Life. I actually read this, I think last year, and I gave it 2 stars. I think this might be another case of I read it, I didn't listen. So like I wonder if that would have been a different experience. But what I can remember from this one is it's like basically like a parallel timeline. One decision how it can split off in your life can take different paths. So that's what that book is exploring. I truly don't remember much about it, but I'm leaving it on the list. That way you have more audiobook options for later. Kristin Hannah is the other author that I will always listen if Julia's narrating. She has 3 books that I've done: The 4 Winds, The Great Alone, and The Women. The 4 Winds follows a mom and her kiddos as they move from Texas to California during the Dust Bowl era. Phenomenal, highly recommend. The Great Alone is really cool because that takes place in Alaska, which is where I'm at. So it just was fun to read about. That follows Lenny and her family as they move, again, I think from California to a remote town across the bay in Homer. It's a fictional town, very much inspired by like Alaska. And I think Kristin Hannah, her family used to own a lodge in Sterling, Alaska. So like, you could just tell she knew the area when she was writing this book. I've actually read and listened to this. It was a very fun, enjoyable read and listen. It really just highlights how hard Alaska can be though. Like if you live in any place really where it's dark and cold for the majority of the time during the day, you just know that can kind of be a struggle. And we get to watch Lenny and her family like live in the wilderness, isolated, and we get to see her father like slowly descend into madness. And it is quite a time. If like out of the three, if you're going to pick a historical fiction to read from Kristin Hannah and listen to Julia Whelan, I would highly, highly recommend The Women. That is her newest release, and this follows Frankie, who decides to go to Vietnam and be a combat nurse, kind of following her brother's footsteps. It is such a powerful story already, but you have Julia Whelan, like, and oh my God, the emotion she puts into this narration was fantastic. Highly recommend listening to this one if you haven't. Ugh, it's about as heartbreaking as you can imagine. It deals with like wartime trauma, PTSD, just the repercussions of coming back from Vietnam and like everything Frankie goes through. She makes some not great decisions, but at the same time, like you understand why she's struggling, why things are happening the way they're happening, and it is just so powerful. So if like, I don't know, if you're like taking any like recommendation, I highly recommend that one. I don't know, it kind of depends on what you're looking for. I think all of these are great. So I hopefully I have a good enough mix. So if you want like a fantasy, if you want like a lesbian romance, if you want rom-com, like I got options for you. So definitely check out Julia Whelan if you're looking for an audiobook narrator. My other audiobook narrator that I really, really enjoy listening to is Michael Kramer. He narrates a lot of Brandon Sanderson books, and that is how I found him. He's in a few others that I will talk about too. Most notably for Michael Kramer is Mistborn Era 1 and 2. This follows Vin. She's an orphan essentially. She's working with a bad thieving crew, and she gets picked up by Kelsier, who wants to take over the Lord Ruler. There is a hard magic system involving metals. It is such a fantastic trilogy. Like, if you ever want to check out Brandon Sanderson, I really do recommend Mistborn as a starting point, but also like if you want an audiobook version, it is also fantastic. I have listened and read this series multiple times, and oh my God, my most recent listen had me sobbing, and I know it happens, but I was crying. It was ridiculous. It was so good. Era 2 takes place in the same world, I think like hundreds of years later, and it is more of like a kind of like Western style. It still has the same magic system, but it's a little more modernized, kind of Western. We have Wax and Wayne, that's our dynamic duo in that book, but it is just such a fun series to check out if you're looking for an audiobook series to binge, because there's a lot of hours in these books, okay? The other one that Michael Kramer narrates, he actually co-narrates The Way of Kings and Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. The co-narrator is Kate Redding. I do enjoy her voice, and I enjoy the two of them together. I prefer Michael Kramer a little bit more, but that's just because I've listened to him more than Kate Redding. But either way, like, you would not be led astray if you picked up either series. I have not listened to the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan, but I have book one. It's narrated by Michael Kramer, so if I am going to check it out, I will most likely be listening to the entire series just because I like his voice so much. He's so versatile in all of his characters, because a lot of these big epic fantasy stories have so many characters, and he's able to portray so many different people. I also don't mind how he can change his voice to sound more feminine when we have female characters. His presentation, like just what he brings to the audiobook, is done really well, and I just love his performances. Michael Kramer has also narrated the Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. I have gotten to the first book in this series, The Grace of Kings, and I really enjoyed it. I would say this is more of a like historical fiction fantasy story because it is heavily inspired by the Han Dynasty in China. This follows Yuni, Garu, and Mata, and they are like kind of on opposing forces, like opposing sides, but they ultimately end up meeting. They become best friends, they become generals, and they're like spearheading this war. However, throughout the course of this war, they get split up, and like alliances change, and you just get to see how their friendship and how the war and land around them changes. I believe the rest of the series follows future generations. I'm hoping to dive back into that soon. I mean, the TBR is forever long, but hoping to dive into that soon so I can just keep that momentum going. But I really did enjoy that first book, the story that Ken Liu wrote, but also how Michael Kramer narrated it. Okay, now moving on to just like specific audiobooks that I have really enjoyed. The first one is Billy Summers by Stephen King. This one caught me by surprise. I was quite emotional by the end of this book. I did not know what to expect going in, and like the book just like took a really surprising turn, and I loved it so much. This is narrated by Paul Sparks, and I feel like he was Billy Summers to me. Like his voice was absolutely perfect for this story, and I think that really made an even better experience. Billy Summers is a hitman, and it's almost your classic take on like it's my last job, like I'm getting out of this, you know, I've got my safe house set up, my go bag ready, like last job and we're out. The last job goes wrong, and then Billy's plans get kind of interrupted when a new character enters the story. Just how the story developed from there, I really, really enjoyed and was pleasantly surprised. This is not a horror novel, it's a crime thriller. It does get pretty dark, there is sexual assault, I mean he's a hitman so he's killing people, there's drug abuse, there is like a sex trafficking scheme at some point. All of it though was really well done, and I found myself crying at the end, so it was a really, really great listen. So if you are looking for a crime thriller specifically, I think Billy Summers would be a great option. I actually have 2 more Stephen King books. The next one is Christine, and this is narrated by Halter Graham. This was recommended by a friend, and she's like, listen to the audiobook because you can hear our main character get crazier and crazier and crazier. And it was cool to like hear that change of like instability. Like our character is unwell. This book follows 2 friends, Arnie and Dennis. Arnie ends up getting a 1958 Plymouth Fury. It is fire engine red, it is sexy, and he's like working on it. But we get to see how Arnie and Dennis's relationship changes during high school as like Arnie starts to like develop more confidence and like his skin clears up. Like there's all these things that start to change once Arnie gets his car Christine, and that starts to affect their relationship. The story is primarily being told from Dennis's point of view, I believe. I don't think we change. I think it is Dennis's point of view. But we get to hear how unhinged Arnie is getting as the car gets more and more power and possessed. It was a really fun listen. I really enjoyed it if you are looking for another Stephen King novel to listen to. And then I also have The Outsider by Stephen King, narrated by Will Patton. The Outsider follows a detective and Carrie, who is suddenly accused of murdering and like defiling a young boy's corpse that is found in town. Tragedy has struck. We're really trying to figure out what happened, who did it. It was a good crime thriller. It does get a little supernatural and weird at the end, but there's definitely something insidious happening in this town. And I really loved Will Patton's delivery and like how he voiced all these characters, specifically Holly Gibney. I'm pretty sure she's like her cute little old lady, and we have like a spin-off series on spin-off book on Holly now. I believe she makes appearances in a few other of Stephen King's books, but I just remember like overall enjoying the listening experience to this book because it was engaging, it was weird, it was wacky, the delivery was great. So if you're looking for another King, I think this would be a good option as well. Will Patton also narrated a series called The Raven Cycle. There are 4 books in this series. This is by Maggie Stiefvater. So this follows like a really fun group of high schoolers. We have a Blue who like her mother's clairvoyant, I think her mom's best friend or aunt, like they have powers. Blue can kind of see things, and one night she ends up seeing like the ghost of a boy she knows from school named Gansey, and then like shortly thereafter Gansey and his buddies show up. So we're trying to figure out like why she saw Gansey's ghost, like what is happening. They live in a very strange land where there are ley lines, like magical lines that like point to things, and Gansey and his other like guy friends, they are trying to find like the remains and tomb of a magical king, and it ends up being a really fun adventure. I listened to this so long ago, I don't remember much more than that, other than I really enjoyed my experience. I really enjoyed Will Patton's delivery. Again, like he was able to do all of these different voices, like you could just feel the friendship and the camaraderie, and I mean, I know a lot of the credit goes to the author, but Will Patton really brought this friendship and this like group of boys and blue together, and it was really fun. The next series I want to talk about is the Skyard Series by Brandon Sanderson and narrated by Susie Jackson. I know I have talked about this a few times, but I really do think this is a great audiobook series. Truthfully, I do not love book 3 that much, and I still need to finish book 4. Feelings aside, I think Susie Jackson does a great narration. She really brought Spencer to life for me. She's able to give voices to all her flight mates. Mbot is an AI ship, and like his voice is hilarious. Like, I think he's so funny. And I just really love like Susie's voice for Spencer. Like, she's just really done so well bringing all these people to life for me. Follow Spencer. She wants to be a fighter pilot so bad. And we just get to see her like go on this journey, ultimately getting it and trying to save her planet. And it is just, it's my favorite young adult sci-fi. So if you're looking for maybe something for a young reader who wants to check out an audiobook series, I do think this would be a good option for you. There are novellas that Susie Jackson also narrates, but I think if you just did the main series, you'd be fine either way. I'm still working through those novellas myself, truthfully. But I just really love this series, and it's on the list of audiobooks I've enjoyed because I love it so much. Another sci-fi that I think you have to listen to, like, you have to listen to this one. You will not get the same experience if you read it physically. I'm telling you right now, there's a certain production choice made that you will only get by listening, and you will miss out if you read it. The downside is it's only available on Audible, but if you are looking for a new sci-fi, please check out Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This book is narrated by Ray Porter, and it is so much fun. It is so much fun. All you need to know, our main character wakes up on a spaceship, light years from Earth. He doesn't know who he is. He doesn't remember why he's there or what he's supposed to do. And we get to figure this out with him. An unlikely friendship occurs. It is science heavy to an extent, but it is broken down in a very digestible way. I found our main character super funny and likable. Towards the end of the book, I was like guessing what was going on because I'm like, oh my god, like I understand all of this science and math and physics. Like, it was very understandable and digestible. If this author sounds familiar, he also wrote The Martian. I like this one more though. I thought this was so much fun. I thought this was so much better than The Martian. So if you're going to like listen to any audiobook, I really do recommend this one because there's sound effects that are really important, and you will not get that if you just read the book. So definitely check this one out on Audible, okay? Okay. Another really fun book that I think is worth your time listening is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is about a fictional rock band, but what makes this so engaging is it's almost like interview style, and you have multiple cast members for each member of the band. So it really does feel like a conversation, like a dialogue. It's super engaging. I remember like just listening to this in the summer thinking like, man, I just want to be like, I want to be a fucking rock star. You know what I mean? I just wanted to be Daisy Jones, and it was so fun. So I do recommend this one as well to get like a really immersive experience. If you're looking for like something silly and fun, if you're looking for a demon romance, I recommend That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon by Kimberly Lemming. This book is narrated by Hazel Addison, and it is so funny. So our main character, her name is Cinnamon. They're all named after spices, and she just wants to work on her family's farm and like harvest spices. She accidentally comes home from like a village party, like shit-faced, and saves this guy, and he ends up being a demon. And then he comes knocking on her door and is like, hey, the reason your village was attacked and like these things are happening is because there's a bad guy, and I need you to come help me. So she like goes off on this adventure, and it's like ridiculous and fun and full of like sexy time. But what makes this, I think, extra enjoyable as an audiobook is the audiobook narrator's voice. She adds an extra layer of sass to Cinnamon that is so fucking funny. And it's hilarious when you're like listening to like the sexy stuff. Because when he caresses my nipple, like Cinnamon doesn't want to go on any adventures, and it is so funny like to listen to because Cinnamon is so spicy and sassy, and the narrator just like embodied it. We had picked this for a book club, and me and another girl who listened to it were dying because it was so funny. So if you need a good laugh, a good listen, a sexy demon romance, then like definitely check this out because it was it was funny. And it just also feels like extra ridiculous to be like listening to something so like sexually graphic, like driving your car. It was a good time. I was giggling. So definitely check this out. I feel like Hazel did a great job narrating this one. The next book that I really enjoyed listening to was This Is How You Lose the Time War. This is a dual author book, Emil El-Motar and Max Gladstone. I'm not familiar with either of them, but I do still want to check out what else they've written because I enjoyed the structure of the story. It's so unique, and then you get this dual narration with Cynthia Farrell and Emily Wu Zeller, and it was so beautiful. I think they're women just because the voices are women, but if you're looking for a romance that spans like time, space, and like logic, it's like a mind-bending sci-fi, like definitely check it out. You are essentially dropped into like the middle of this intergalactic war between two opposing sides, and we basically get red and blue, and they start leaving each other clues and messages to decipher. At first it's like a competition, it's fun, but they end up developing feelings for one another, and like their romance just like transcends time. And it was a really, like, it was so engaging because like half the time you're like, what the hell's happening? But then you're like, wow, that was absolutely stunning. It was beautiful. If you're looking for something unique and different, I thought this was a great audiobook. Another audiobook that I think would be really fun for the fall time specifically would be A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson, and this is narrated by Abby Creighton. This was also a book club pick we had picked last year, and I was in the minority. I loved the audiobook. I really loved Abby Creighton's narration. I loved the book. Like, I feel like I missed the point of the book. Like, I understand what it was trying to do, but I thought her narration, like, made this book sexy, even though it's like abusive. This essentially follows, he's never named, but a vampire, Dracula, and he turns this woman, and like she gets pretty manipulated in this relationship, not knowing what she's signing up for. She's just near death and wants to be saved, and he takes advantage of that. She is saved, she's a vampire now and living under his roof. And the story's kind of told in like letters almost, but as their relationship goes on, he like won't let her leave. He'll like love bomb her, then disappear, and then he adds other vampires to this relationship. So like I said, I enjoyed this in a different way. I'm like, ooh, like a sexy polygamy vampire thing, like perfect. Whereas my friends were like, this is a really great look at domestic abuse. I think I missed the point of the book, but I still really enjoyed it. I liked Abby's delivery. I don't know, I thought it was like kind of a sexy listen, as weird as that sounds. I enjoyed it. The next audiobook I really enjoyed was The Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeli Booley, and this is narrated by Isabel Starr-LeBlanc. I think this is worth your listen because it follows a young native girl. She's half native, half white, and she's struggling with like her place in the tribe and the community. Murder happens in this area and it like shakes the whole town, right? There's a drug scheme happening, like someone's been murdered, we have an undercover cop, like we have all these things going on. But what I think makes this a really beautiful audiobook is the narrator, Isabel, says these native Anishinaabe words, and they're so gorgeous. Like, hearing this other language was really beautiful, and it is done in such a seamless way. I was never confused. Like, it just was like brought in so well that, I don't know, I just enjoyed listening to these words. Like, I never would have read them with my eyes the same way that they're being said. So I do think that is a really fun audiobook to check out. I really enjoyed like the sense of community her tribe has. Like, it was really gorgeous, really beautiful, and I would highly recommend checking this one out as an audiobook. I recently read The Whalebone Theater. This is by Joanna Quinn, narrated by Olivia Vinall. This is a World War II historical fiction, but the war stuff isn't really like the primary setting and time frame. We kind of get like this life story leading up to World War II, and it follows Christabel and her family and her siblings and all of their wacky, artistic, eclectic friends, and just all these different relationships, and then that kind of leads us up to the war. I loved Olivia Vinall's delivery. Her voice is gorgeous. She was able to do like a French accent, an English accent, Russian. She was able to do so many different accents without losing some of like the comprehension. It was all just so stunning. The book itself was so enjoyable, but I just feel like listening to it like elevated my experience, made me cry. It was stunning, and I am definitely going to be like keeping both author and narrator kind of just on my watch list to see what else they come out with, because whew, it was good. I really enjoyed it. The next historical fiction I have is The Diamond Eye by Kate Quinn, and this is narrated by Saskia Marleveld. I can't remember, I've talked about this before, the first, best, the only female sniper during World War II. With the audiobook narrator, you get all these beautiful Russian words like spoken out loud. Again, I don't think I would have read them with my eyes the same way they're said. So I just thought it was a really great listening experience. It's a powerful story about this woman doing everything she can, like for her kid, for her country, like she ends up being like the world's deadliest sniper. Even my husband, like he listened to bits of it while we were driving one day and even he enjoyed it. If you're looking for historical fiction, I highly recommend this one. This next book is a classic, right book, wrong time. That is City of Girls by Elizabeth Gilbert, narrated by Blair Brown. I had seen this book recommended by another booktuber years ago, and it follows this woman's life as she leaves her home. She enters like the theater life, like love and loss, and just this like really gorgeous, like time sweeping story. And I remember trying to listen to this a few times and I just couldn't get into it. But finally, like, you know, it was the right time, it was the right mindset, just all of those things aligned, and it ended up being a really lovely story. Definitely enjoyed this one so much. I read this kind of a while ago, so I don't remember much more about it other than I really enjoyed it and I think it is worth checking out. The next book I think that is a really exciting audiobook experience is Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is a full cast narration. We do have one primary narrator, but there are a few extra voices in here. Our audiobook narrator who like narrates kind of like the primary Carrie Soto, I thought her voice was fantastic, but this is a sports centered story. So Carrie Soto has come out of retirement and she is going against Nikki Chan to try to defend her tennis title one more time. I think she's like late 30s, if not in her 40s. That is very unheard of. Like she has come out of retirement for this. There's so many things I loved about this story. I really enjoyed Carrie as a character. She was complicated, driven, focused, messy. I loved her and her father's relationship, but I just think like the way the tennis matches were described, like listening to them was so engaging. Like it felt like I was watching the tennis match in my mind. It just was so neat. And I was so fucking mad that I couldn't go watch their tennis match. Like it just felt so real and it was so cool to listen to. So I really enjoyed that as an audiobook. We are almost done. I have three series that I think are worth your time checking out on audiobooks. The first one is the Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. Books 1 and 2 are narrated by Leslie Manville, and books 3 and 4 are narrated by Fiona Shaw. They did switch narrators partway through, which usually drives me crazy. That bugs me so much, but this was fine. The narrator's voice, I would say similar enough, and the voices, characterizations, and like the tone that Leslie Manville used in books 1 and 2 are like continued on. Like Fiona Shaw did keep a lot of those things similar. So you really like didn't notice it as much. Like sometimes it's really jarring, other times it's fine. And in this instance, it was okay. And I really did enjoy both women's narration of the series. This series follows Elizabeth, Abraham, Ron, and Joyce, and they all live at Cooper's Chase retirement home. This has quickly become a favorite series of mine. And the reason I recommend this as an audiobook specifically is because it has a lot of British humor. And I don't think I would have understood as much as the humor if it had just been read. The delivery, the tone, the timing of certain things I think are really important with that type of humor just because it's a little different and it's so funny. Like the book is hilarious. All of them are funny. And I think it's because we have an English or British narrator telling an English story with the English cadence and humor and like all of those things just like match perfectly. So highly recommend the Thursday Murder Club as an audiobook series to check out. It has been such a fun series to consume. I am caught up now, and there's some like interviews at the end with the narrator and Richard Osman for book 3 and 4. I don't remember that being there for books 1 and 2, but for books 3 and 4, we get an extra interview with the author narrator. And it sounds like his plan is to do a book every year. So I'm excited to keep going and just to see how this series progresses because I have really enjoyed it. If you are looking for I'd say like, it's like borderline young adult, new adult, fantasy, maybe grimdark series, I would definitely check out 3 Dark Crowns by Kendar Blake, and this is narrated by Amy Landon. This was a random pickup for me. Sometimes when I'm looking for audiobooks, I go to Libby, the library app, and search by audiobooks available now, preview the voice, and like check a book out on a whim. And that's what happened with this series. It was kind of on a whim, kind of random. I'd kind of seen it, didn't really know what it was about, went in and really enjoyed this series. I think this would be a really fun listen in the fall time. Well, it is a like fantasy series. It's got very like grim themes and dark magic. These triplets, they turn 16 And now within the year, they have to kill each other in order to secure a crown. Only one of them will make it to the crown alive. I just really enjoyed it. I liked all the characters. I liked the narration. I loved how everything was presented. The stakes were high. Like, I mean, not all the sisters make it out alive. The magic is really unique too. So one of these sisters is an elementalist, so she can control the weather. Another one can talk to animals. Another one is a poisoner, so she can ingest all these toxic things and be fine. So it's just like really fascinating to like enter this like darker fantasy world and like meet these sisters. I don't know, you end up like really enjoying all of them even though they're trying to kill each other. The last audiobook series I want to talk about is the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown. There are two ways to consume this as an audiobook. There is the traditional audiobook narration. This is primarily done by Tim Gerald Reynolds. So book 1, 2, and 3 are Tim Gerald Reynolds. And then you have books 4 and 5, which have a full cast. You have multiple narrators with multiple POVs. And then book 6, this is where I get upset. Book 6 goes back to a single narrator with the multiple POVs. And that really bothers me. Red Rising community is incredibly divided on Reddit. Some people hate the multiple narrators. Other people hate Tim Gerald Reynolds. Like, everyone's unhappy, but I feel like when they were producing this most recent book, book 6, Lightbringer, I feel like they were kind of bullied into bringing back Tim Gerald Reynolds as the primary narrator. What is this book about? So this series follows Darrow. Something happens and he is now like kind of thrust into a rebellion. His world is super interesting. It's stratified by colors. So we have golds at the top and reds are the lowest. Darrow's a red and he thinks he's alone on Mars with his clan mining for helium-3. When this inciting event happens, he realizes he is not alone. They've never been alone on Mars, and in fact, they've been colonized for quite some time, but they are still stuck mining. And golds are ruling at the top. Darrow gets turned into a gold to infiltrate their society, to take them down. It expands so much more than that. Like this series really does get quite explosive. I do think Tim Gerald Reynolds is a great Darrow. Like, he really embodies Darrow. He has a lovely voice for that. Like, he's strong and he's powerful. He brings these things to life. I was excited to get more voices for books 4 and 5. A few of them changed from book 4 to 5. It was fine. There's a little bit of continuity errors with like some of the pronunciations and things, but I loved having those extra point of views because it's all like we have 2 arcs to the story. We have the first trilogy with Darrow. He's our only POV. He's our only point of view we're getting for the trilogy. And then we go 10 years later and the world has opened up and we have more points of view. Okay. So with those extra points of view, we get extra voices, and it made for such an immersive listening experience to have some of this back and forth. Dark Age has probably one of the best battle scenes I have ever listened to because like the way Pierce Brown wrote it and then the way it's told with these different voices was like boom, boom, boom. Like, it was so fucking cool. And then we go back to a single narrator for all of these characters, and that really bummed me out. I was really upset that they did that because we still have all these other characters, but one narrator. And as fantastic as Tim Gerald Reynolds is, he cannot play everybody. There's not enough variation in the voices, especially because we had female voices in books 4 and 5, like, and they just brought those female characters to life a lot more. And then we go back to a guy's voice. I was like, I just wish we could have both ways and have like the full cast narration and Tim Gerald Reynolds for the other people to keep them happy. Regardless, so that is one way to consume the story. There is now a dramatized adaptation for books 1, 2, and 3 where you have sound effects, you have music, like it's more like voice acting, like an audio movie almost. I don't know how much of the actual story is taken out. I've listened to parts of it. I just think because I started with the other audiobooks, I prefer those a lot more. My only beef with those, if you look them up, you have to buy 2 books to get the full story for book 1. Like, the dramatized adaptations are broken up. So if you do check it out, just know, but that could be a more engaging way to check out this series. That is it, you guys. Thank you so much for listening to me like yap about audiobooks, my favorite narrators, my favorite books in general. I hope you had so much fun. If you pick something up and listen to it, or you have a favorite audiobook, please let me know down below. That way we can gush about them. Just keep this list of audiobooks going because I really do think audiobooks are special and I love them so much. So hopefully you do too, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!